The old homeless man with the dirty beard and worn beanie watched the two young men laugh at him outside the Ferrari dealership on Rodeo Drive. "Get back to Skid Row, old-timer," shouted Mike and Tyler, mechanics at the luxury garage, as he touched the glass, protecting a $500,000 Ferrari SF90 Stradale. But when the bum pulled out a satellite phone and spoke one sentence in perfect Harvard English, the world flipped upside down. "This is Harrison. Buy the entire dealership, now." Within 30 minutes, the two mechanics who had humiliated him discovered that the homeless man they'd chased away was James Harrison, America's most eccentric billionaire, secret owner of Ferrari North America and half of Beverly Hills, who disguised himself to test people's humanity. And their lives were about to change forever, but not how they expected. Los Angeles, Rodeo Drive, a November morning wrapped in the unusual fog that sometimes creeps in from the Pacific. The Ferrari Beverly Hills dealership gleamed like a jewel of glass and steel among the luxury boutiques, displaying in its windows cars that cost more than most people's homes. Mike Rodriguez, 28, and Tyler Johnson, 32, worked as specialized mechanics in the adjacent garage, living the dream of touching the world's most desired cars daily, even if they could never afford them. That morning, as they smoked their break cigarette outside the entrance, they noticed a figure who completely clashed with the exclusive environment. A man of about 70, wearing a torn military surplus jacket that had seen better days, pants held up by rope, shoes with holes revealing torn socks. The gray, unkempt beard covered half his face. A greasy beanie hid his matted hair. The very incarnation of poverty amid obscene opulence. The man had stopped in front of the main window, eyes fixed on the red Ferrari SF90 Stradale, displayed like a work of art. His dirty hands gently touched the glass, leaving prints that made the security personnel watching from internal cameras cringe. But there was something in the way he looked at the car. A knowledge, an intimacy that went beyond simple admiration. Mike elbowed Tyler with a nasty grin. They were young, arrogant in their position as Ferrari experts, intoxicated by the luxury they handled daily, even if they didn't own it. Seeing a homeless person in front of their temple of speed was an offense that demanded action. They approached with the swagger of those who feel they own the territory. Mike, shorter but more aggressive, spoke first, his voice dripping with contempt as he blew cigarette smoke toward the old man. Tyler laughed behind him, recording everything with his phone for social media, already savoring the likes he'd harvest by humiliating a bum. The old man didn't turn immediately. He continued observing the Ferrari with a concentration that seemed out of place. When he finally turned, his blue eyes gleamed with a strange light, as if hiding an amusing secret. He didn't respond to the provocations, merely smiling under his dirty beard, a smile that irritated the two mechanics even more. The situation escalated quickly. Mike started shoving him, Tyler laughing louder while filming. Other employees came out to watch, some laughing, others uncomfortable, but no one intervened. The dealership manager, Mr. Peterson, watched from his second-floor window, annoyed by the scene, but more concerned about the bum dirtying his showroom's image than his dignity. It was when Mike ripped the beanie from his head, revealing matted gray hair, that something changed in the old man's expression. Not anger, but a kind of deep sadness mixed with determination. Slowly, with movements that betrayed a dignity hidden under the rags, he pulled from his jacket's inner pocket something that silenced everyone. A $10,000 Iridium satellite phone, the type used by military and billionaires in remote zones. He dialed a number calmly, ignoring the shocked looks. When he spoke, his voice changed completely. No longer hoarse and uncertain, but firm, authoritative, with a perfect Ivy League accent that cut through the air like a blade. The conversation was brief, surgical. He gave precise coordinates, instructions that sounded like military codes, then hung up. He put his beanie back on, looked at the two paralyzed mechanics, and simply said in English, with a perfect California accent that betrayed very different origins from a homeless person, "You have 30 minutes to decide what kind of people you want to be. After that, it'll be too late." The 30 minutes that followed were the most surreal in Ferrari Beverly Hills history. First came 3 black Bentleys with tinted windows that parked in perfect formation outside the entrance. Men in Armani suits stepped out, looking like they'd emerged from a spy movie. Discreet earpieces, coordinated movements. Then a helicopter landed on the roof of the adjacent building. Finally, a procession of luxury cars that blocked the entire street. Mr. Peterson ran down from his office, face pale as he received a call from the CEO of Ferrari North America personally. His hands trembled as he listened, nodded, stammered apologies. When he hung up, he looked at the old homeless man still standing by the window as if seeing a ghost. Mike and Tyler, still with phones in hand but now unable to film, watched the atmosphere transform. Colleagues who were laughing before now whispered nervously. Security that seemed ready to chase the bum now maintained a respectful distance. Something huge was happening, and they were at the cyclone's center without understanding. It was one of the suited men who introduced himself as Attorney Morrison, who dropped the bomb. In a professional voice, but with an undertone of reverential respect, he addressed the homeless man, calling him Mr. Harrison. The name struck everyone like lightning. James Harrison, the ghost of American business, the man who owned empires but whom no one had seen in years, the billionaire who'd made his fortune in Silicon Valley before disappearing from the public scene. The legends about Harrison were infinite. They said he owned 30% of Ferrari North America through offshore companies, that he had hidden estates on every continent, that he secretly funded pediatric hospitals in Africa. But above all, they told of his eccentricity, his disgust for the hypocrisy of the rich world, his habit of testing people in bizarre ways. The homeless man slowly removed his dirty jacket, revealing underneath a cashmere sweater that, despite its disheveled appearance, betrayed superior quality. He removed the fake beard with a theatrical gesture, showing a face that, cleaned up, indeed belonged to the rare photos of James Harrison that circulated in closed financial circles. The transformation wasn't just physical. The hunched man became erect. The dull eyes became laser-sharp. The bum's smile became the grin of someone who holds the world in his palm. He turned to Mike and Tyler, who had turned white as wax, legs trembling, phones fallen to the ground. Harrison spoke with devastating calm. He told how he'd started disguising himself after his son died of an overdose, surrounded by friends who flattered him for money. How he'd discovered that people's true character only emerged when they thought they were dealing with someone inferior. How he'd bought and sold companies based on these humanity tests. Then came the revelation that froze everyone's blood. He'd just bought the entire dealership, the building housing it, and the whole city block. In 30 minutes, while they stood paralyzed, his lawyers had completed the $50 million acquisition. Everyone present was technically his employee, and he'd recorded everything, every insult, every shove, every laugh. The dealership's conference room transformed into an impromptu tribunal. Harrison sat at the head of the table, still half-dressed as a homeless man, but emanating an authority that made those present tremble. One by one, he brought in all employees who'd been present during the humiliation. The incident video, captured by high-definition security cameras, was projected on the giant screen normally used to present Ferraris to VIP clients. Every detail was crystal clear. The laughs, the shoves, the cruel comments, but also those who watched without intervening, those who laughed from windows, those who pretended to see nothing. Harrison had a dossier on each of them, compiled over years of hidden surveillance. He knew about Mike's gambling debts, Tyler's cheating on his pregnant wife, Mr. Peterson's small corruption inflating estimates, but his attention focused on 2 unexpected figures. The first was Sarah, the young receptionist who'd come out during the scene to secretly bring the homeless man a bottle of water while everyone laughed. The second was George, the oldest mechanic who'd tried to stop Mike but was silenced with threats about his job. Harrison revealed he'd done this test at 12 Ferrari dealerships across America. Only in 2 had he found people who treated him with dignity despite his appearance. And he'd rewarded those people beyond imagination. Business partnerships, funding for personal projects, scholarships for children. Power, he said, wasn't in owning but in being able to change lives based on moral merit, not economic. For Mike and Tyler, he prepared a punishment he called educational. Not firing, too easy. For a year, they'd work in his homeless shelters, keeping their mechanic salary but living the reality of those they'd mocked. Every morning at 5 a.m., every evening until 11 p.m., in contact with real poverty, the kind you can't remove like a fake beard. If they refused, he'd release the videos, making them unemployable in the automotive sector forever. Mr. Peterson was demoted to junior salesman, his position given to Sarah, who, Harrison discovered, had an MBA from UCLA, but hadn't found better work due to lack of connections. George became the new shop foreman with triple salary and the promise of funding for the independent garage he dreamed of opening. But the biggest twist was yet to come. Harrison announced that the Ferrari SF90 Stradale in the window, the one he'd admired as a bum, he'd already bought 6 months earlier through a shell company. He'd left it there as bait, knowing he'd eventually pass by to do his test. Now that Ferrari would be donated to a charity auction, the proceeds destined for a revolutionary project. The first days at the New Hope shelter were hell for Mike and Tyler. Located in the worst part of South Los Angeles near Skid Row, the shelter housed 300 homeless people, undocumented immigrants, recovering addicts. The smell of urine and desperation permeated every corner. The nighttime screams of alcoholic nightmares echoed in the corridors. The violence of extreme poverty was palpable. Mike, used to the smell of Ferrari's fine leather,
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
now cleaned encrusted bathrooms and served soup. His hands, once proud to touch dream engines, now bandaged infected wounds of real homeless people, those who couldn't remove their mask. Tyler, who boasted on social media about his luxury mechanic life, now slept in a room with other volunteers, woken at 4 a.m. by preparations for breakfast for 300 desperate souls. Harrison visited them weekly, always incognito, blending with the residents. He watched them struggle with the reality they'd always ignored. He saw Mike vomit the first day after cleaning an alcoholic's vomit. He saw Tyler cry, hidden after a Roma child asked if his mom would return, when everyone knew she'd died of cold. But slowly, something began to change. Mike discovered he had a talent for calming the most violent. His natural aggression transformed into protection for the weakest. Tyler started teaching basic mechanics to the shelter's youth, giving them a marketable skill. Not through cinematic redemption, but through psychological survival, they began seeing residents as people. The turning point came in the third month. A 50-year-old man, Frank, arrived at the shelter. Former Boeing engineer, he'd lost everything: job, family, home, to an illness that left him with impossible medical debts. He spoke 4 languages, had patents to his name, yet had been sleeping on the streets for 2 years. Mike recognized him. He was the man he'd chased from the dealership a year earlier, when he was still disturbing customers asking for work. Frank didn't recognize him immediately in the volunteer uniform, but when he did, instead of anger, he showed only tiredness. He told his story, how illness had destroyed him financially, how former colleagues had abandoned him, how the system he'd served for 20 years had discarded him like trash. Mike didn't sleep that night, tormented by awareness of how many times he'd judged without knowing. Tyler had his epiphany when a 19-year-old girl, Emma, arrived at the shelter. beautiful despite the dirt, intelligent despite the streets. She prostituted herself to survive after escaping a violent family. Tyler saw his sister in her. Same age, same eyes. The difference? Family. He began understanding that between him and these rejects, there were only circumstances, not moral superiority. Harrison watched everything through hidden cameras and reports from real volunteers. He wasn't looking for saints. He was looking for understanding, and slowly, painfully, he saw it being born. At the 6th month of punishment, Harrison summoned Mike and Tyler to his real office on the 40th floor of the U.S. Bank Tower downtown. The contrast with the shelter was violent. Carrara marble, 360-degree views of Los Angeles, artwork worth millions. But the two mechanics weren't the same ones who'd mocked a fake homeless man. 6 months of raw reality had hollowed them, aged them, but also somehow purified them. Harrison had them sit and showed them videos. Not them at the shelter, but them before. Nightclub evenings where they spent in one night what a family at the shelter lived on for a month. Social posts where they bragged about touching Ferraris while despising those who took public transport. Recorded conversations where they talked about scum, referring to anyone earning less than them. Then he showed other videos. Mike sharing his lunch with Frank even though he was hungry. Tyler using his salary to buy medicine for Emma instead of the designer shoes he loved, both organizing a collection among former colleagues to pay for a lawyer for an immigrant family about to be separated. The transformation wasn't complete, Harrison admitted. Maybe it never would be fully, but it was real. And in the shitty world they lived in, the reality of change was worth more than unattainable perfection. He offered them a choice: return to the dealership with a promotion, forgetting everything like a bad dream, or continue on a different path. He revealed his real project: a chain of solidarity garages where expert mechanics would repair cars for struggling families at reduced prices, simultaneously teaching the trade to youth from the shelter. Not charity, but sustainable business with a social purpose. They needed people who knew both worlds, that of Ferrari luxury and that of street survival. Mike accepted immediately, not for redemption, but because he could no longer return to pretending the world was divided into winners and losers. Tyler hesitated. He had a wife, a newborn, bills to pay. But then he thought of Emma, of Frank, of all the faces he now saw when he closed his eyes, and accepted too. The project started quietly. The first garage opened right in South LA, in the worst neighborhood. Clients were suspicious. A garage run by former Ferrari mechanics repairing beat-up Hondas? But it worked. Mike had brought Ferrari excellence to the ghetto. Tyler, the efficiency. In 3 months, they were profitable. In 6 months, they were hiring youth from the shelter. In a year, they opened the second location. 2 years after the homeless man incident, Los Angeles had changed, at least in small part. Harrison Garages, name chosen against the founder's wish to remain anonymous, had become 6, employed 80 people, half of whom came from difficult situations. Mike had become operational director, Tyler training manager. They weren't saints. Mike still drank too much. Tyler still occasionally cheated on his wife. But they made a difference. The evening of the 2nd anniversary, Harrison organized an event at the Ferrari dealership where everything had started. He invited everyone: the employees from then, the shelter volunteers, the youth from the Solidarity garages. In the center of the showroom, instead of the SF-90 Stradale, stood an old beat-up Civic, the first car repaired in the South LA garage, having belonged to a single mother who now worked as an accountant for the garages. During the speech, Harrison made his final revelation. He wasn't sick, but he was 72 and wanted to settle things. He'd decided to donate 90% of his fortune, $3 billion, to the foundation managing the shelters and garages. Mike and Tyler would be on the board of directors, not as rewards, but as witnesses to what it meant to fall and rise again. But the real coup de théâtre came when Frank entered, the disgraced engineer. He wore a modest but dignified suit, had gained weight back, his eyes no longer dead. He'd been hired by a sustainable mobility startup after Tyler circulated his resume. By his side was Emma, no longer on the streets, but an engineering student with a foundation scholarship. Harrison had them come on the improvised stage. He said they were the real success, not the positive balance sheets or opened garages. People the system had discarded and who now contributed to changing it. Then he did something unexpected. He removed his expensive jacket, his silk tie, and put on the old homeless jacket he'd kept. He addressed Mike and Tyler directly for the last time. He thanked them, not for becoming good, but for giving him the opportunity to believe again that people could change. He recounted that his son, before dying, had told him the problem with the rich was they no longer saw people, only numbers and status. The two of them, in their imperfection, had proven you could learn to see again. The event ended with a surreal scene. Billionaires talking with former homeless people, Ferrari mechanics comparing notes with street mechanics, Sarah, now dealership director, organizing internships for shelter youth. It wasn't a Hollywood happy ending. Many of those youth would return to the streets. Many of those rich would return to their indifference. But it was a beginning. While everyone celebrated, Harrison slipped out silently. They found him the next morning sitting on a bench in Griffith Park, dressed as a homeless man, dead in his sleep with a serene smile. He'd left precise instructions: minimal funeral, no flowers, all money saved to the foundation, and a final letter for Mike and Tyler. "I didn't save you," he wrote. "I just showed you the mirror. What you saw disgusted you enough to change. The merit is yours. The disguised billionaire was just a trick. The real wealth you found serving soup to the hungry. Continue, not for redemption, but because now you know that between you and them, there's only luck, not merit. P.S. The Ferrari in the window? It's yours. Sell it and hire 15 more kids. The Ferrari sold for $480,000. With that money, they hired not 15 but 20 youth, opened another garage, and created a microcredit fund. Mike married Sarah 2 years later. Tyler divorced and found peace in social work. Harrison Garages became a national model. And every year, on the anniversary of James Harrison's death, all employees wore modest clothes for a day, to remember that under our clothes we're all beggars for something: love, respect, a second chance. And that sometimes the disguised billionaire who can change your life is yourself when you choose to see beyond appearances. The Ferrari Beverly Hills dealership today has a plaque at the entrance. Here on November 15th, a homeless man taught mechanics the value of people. The mechanics, slowly, learned. And in the solidarity garages, between Ferrari posters and photos of smiling homeless people, hangs a phrase from Harrison: "True nobility is not being superior to others, but being superior to your former self, even a little, even imperfectly, but every day." How? Hit like if you believe appearances are always deceiving. Comment with the moment that struck you most. Share to remind that true wealth is in humanity. Subscribe for more stories that flip perspectives, because sometimes the homeless man is a disguised billionaire. But more often, the real beggar is the one who has everything except compassion. And the fastest Ferrari can't outrun the distance between who we are and who we could be.